This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm James Kumarasamy. Thank you for downloading the BBC's World Tonight podcast for Monday, the 4th of November. MPs have elected Labour's Sir Lindsay Hoyle as their new Speaker. So what can we expect from him and what challenges does he face? Live fire is used for the first time in Baghdad in the current wave of anti-government protests there. We'll hear from the Iraqi capital. We'll also find out how Brexit is playing in the election campaign in Northern Ireland and speak to the World Health Organization about the health emergency in Delhi. Plus, the Norwegian campaigners trying to use their country's constitution to stop oil drilling in the Arctic, and a fictional approach to the facts of climate change. You're listening to The World Tonight with James Kumarasamy. Nothing happens very quickly in UK politics these days. 6 hours after MPs had begun the process of choosing a new Speaker, at around 8:30 we finally got the result after multiple rounds of voting. And the winner was the pre-match favourite, the Labour MP, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Following his victory, Sir Lindsay pledged to improve the image of the institution he'll now preside over.
I stand firm that I hope this House will be once a great respected House, not just in here, but across the world. That once again, it's the envy, and we've got to make sure that tarnish is polished away. That the respect and tolerance that we expect from everyone who works in here will be shown, and we'll keep that in order.
Well, Khalid Mahmood is the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr and was one of the MPs who nominated Sir Lindsay to be Speaker. Welcome to The World Tonight. And why did you think he would be and will be a good Speaker?
Lindsay's been in this position for 9 years. He has worked astutely towards this. I made a commitment to him something like 6 years ago when he was first looking for this. He's been the chair of the security for parliamentary members, for the MPs. He's done a fantastic job. He's given the confidence to people that he can be trusted to deal with those very, very serious but important issues, and he's proven that.
And we heard there he's promising to improve the image of Parliament. How do you think he'll go about that?
Well, I think first of all, is very fair, and he is also very firm as well. So I think rather than the more vigorous responses and shouting sometimes from the chair, he will not be involving himself with that. He will see to lead by example. He'll be firm but fair. He'll make sure people are kept in order to do that. And I think what we need to do is have a new way forward. And he's quite right. I think Parliament has been damaged. Its reputation has been damaged. And what we need to do as all of us, as members of Parliament, but also certainly from the Speaker's chair, to actually try and correct that. And he's the best person to do that.
Well, metaphorically, at least, big shoes for him to fill with John Bercow going. He made quite a name for himself, didn't he? Yeah. I mean, the difference is what? Lower key but firm style? I
think absolutely. Lower key, firm style, moving on to business, and less personal point making. I don't see Lindsay as somebody who would castigate members on their personalities or personal issues, which has been the case, which doesn't help Parliament and which doesn't help the House in the way it moves forward. And I think Lindsay will be that. He's not aggressive and he will be polite but fair to ensure members understand the boundaries and work to them.
But he will be a friend of the backbencher, though, will he? And that will mean, at times, having to be pretty outspoken.
Well, I think the procedure is quite simple. He will ensure that the backbenchers are called. He wants to move away from some of the older traditions, i.e. people who've served for a lot longer always get the first chance and first bite of the cherry. What he wants to do is make sure that every constituent is equal. So therefore, members of Parliament are equal. So therefore, the issues that are raised by the members are important to all of us.
And we got a little insight into perhaps one of the more eccentric sides of his character in the interview you gave at the weekend with his pet parrot called Boris, his tortoise called Maggie. Do you think there'll be a little bit of eccentricity in the role?
I think not much. I mean, I think you see that, but I think also he is a very firmly based member of Parliament in his constituency. He has been in the Deputy Speaker's role. He's done that. Also, we've seen that, how he's worked methodically through all of those processes. And I think that's exactly what he'll do in the House of Commons and make sure that members adhere to that.
Khalid Mahmood, Labour MP, one of those who nominated Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Thanks very much. So what are the challenges facing the new Speaker, and how will the outcome of the forthcoming election affect the job he'll now have on his hands? We're joined live by Ruth Fox, Director of the Hansard Society. So let's start with the beginning. He's got one day as Speaker, and then, well, what happens then?
Well, for the election to come, we expect that he will be unopposed in his constituency in Chorley. We don't think the other parties will probably run against him now, as is the tradition for speakers. And he will then have to face another election process, a re-election process at the start of the next Parliament, which we think will come back in December. I would imagine that he may be opposed then, but I would be surprised. I think he's got a pretty good chance of carrying on into the new Parliament.
And what are the main challenges he faces, do you think?
Well, he alluded to it in his speech, as did all the candidates today. I think restoring Parliament's reputation is uppermost. That is its biggest challenge. It's the perception of the public is quite low. The concern about whether the House is as effective as it could be with the eyes of the world on it through this Brexit process, and big concerns about the tone and culture of the House, about the bullying and harassment claims and whether or not they've been tackled, and whether the culture of transparency and accountability in the House is as deep and as embedded as it could be.
He's got a big task on his hands then, hasn't he? And I guess it all depends on what this election produces in the form of a solid majority or indeed a hung Parliament.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons I think that Lindsay Hoyle has won today is because he's tried, he's tested and he's trusted and he's considered fair. But at the end of the day, if we have a hung Parliament after this general election, he will face many of the challenges that Speaker John Bercow has faced about selection of amendments on legislation and motions, about who to call and for how long. Those will be challenges that he will have to face just as much as John Bercow did.
And what do the years he spent as one of the deputies, how have they prepared him for this job, do you think?
Well, as I said, he's tried and tested. He's pretty unflappable. I think what you see, he's chaired budget debates and indeed Prime Minister's questions on occasion, and he tends to use humour and a fairly low-key approach to sort of diffuse tension in the chamber rather than inflame it. So I think we'll see more of that. But I also think, he's got a reputation for dealing with some of the administrative issues behind the scenes that are important, like MP security. And I think those sorts of issues will prepare him for the big challenges that lie ahead.
I mean, John Bercow became a bit of a cult figure around the world, didn't he, during the last year or two? What do you think that the rest of the world will make of him?
Well, I don't think he'll be that kind of cult figure, and I don't think he'll seek the limelight. He won't grandstand in the chamber. I think it'll be very businesslike, much more direct, much more to the point. I think he'll be a quieter voice. I don't think you'll have any of the loquaciousness that we equate with John Bercow. He said it in his speech today, Lindsay Hoyle, it's not about me, and I think he will try and take that into the way he chairs all the debates and so on in the House. He's pretty down to earth, and I think it'll be much more low key, but it is perhaps what the House needs at this point in time.
Ruth Fox, Director of the Hansard Society, thanks very much. The sound of protesters in Baghdad today sprinting towards vehicles containing members of the Iraqi security forces. The response, water cannon and gunfire. And for the first time in the current wave of anti-government demonstrations in that country, live gunfire. Ahmed Abul-Anain is the Reuters correspondent in Baghdad.
So we're entering now the 10th day of this sort of second wave of what are now definitely the largest mass demonstrations in Iraq since at least the fall of Saddam Hussein. Thousands of people continue to gather in the capital's central Tahrir Square to voice their fury at a ruling political elite they blame for all of their economic woes and see as beholden to foreign powers and extremely corrupt. For the first time since that second wave, security forces actually have used live fire on some of the demonstrators, killing at least 5 people. Now, at least in Baghdad, security forces had been refraining from doing so after a damning government report came out showing that between just October 1st and the 7th, 149 protesters had been, and over 70% of those deaths being a result of shots directly to the head or chest. So if today is not an isolated incident, then it looks like they're getting back to their old ways.
Reports of the live fire then, what impact has that had on the protesters?
It's strengthened their resolve. It's made them angrier. There's sort of a core group of protesters who have been sitting in at Tahrir Square and surrounding areas, and that just makes them even more incensed and more insisting on not going anywhere until their demands are met.
And the authorities' response, have they given any more ground? Have they come up with any new offers to the protesters?
No, I mean, there have been no concessions given, and in fact, an absolute inability to deal with the protesters' demands. Earlier, Parliament had passed some reforms that the protesters see as too little too late. The Prime Minister has gone on record to say he is willing to resign if the leading political blocs in Parliament were to agree on a replacement, but that betrays a lack of understanding of what they want, because they're not calling for his resignation. He's not the main target. He's sort of an afterthought. It's an entire post-2003 sectarian-based power-sharing political system that they want completely dismantled.
And away from Baghdad on Sunday, we saw the attack on the Iranian consulate in the holy city of Karbala. 3 people at least shot dead. What would you say the significance of that event was?
Well, Karbala is the site of one of the most significant battles that have caused the Sunni-Shia split, and it's a central city to the whole Shia sect of Islam. Millions of Shia pilgrims from all across the world, including Iran, go there every year. So if such a crucial, symbolically Shia city is turning against Iran, is showing Iranian sentiment, it indicates the shifting priorities for the majority Shia community in Iraq, who are now prioritizing economic issues and their own livelihoods over sectarian identity. They see that Iran backs, and in some cases actually installs, the very leaders that they blame for all of their hardships.
And that was the Reuters correspondent in Baghdad, Ahmed Abulanain. Let's return to UK politics and the impact that Brexit is having on the general election campaign in Northern Ireland. Because the contours of a Remain alliance there became clearer today, as Sinn Féin said it wouldn't field candidates in 3 constituencies to help other pro-Remain parties defeat Brexiteers from the DUP. A few hours earlier, the SDLP had announced that it would stand aside in 3 seats for the same purpose. Remain alliance, electoral pact. Sinn Féin's President Mary Lou McDonald said the goal was more important than the label.
You can call this a pact, you can call it what you wish. The reality is that we are asking people to come out and to vote for those pro-Remain candidates. We believe that is the right, the progressive thing to do, and the thing that most at the highest level actually reflects the interests of people here in the north of Ireland.
The leader of the DUP, Eileen Foster, criticised this political pooling of resources, singling out the SDLP's decision to make way for Sinn Féin in the North Belfast constituency, where her deputy, Nigel Dodds, is the long-standing MP.
We will, as I said, be standing on our record of delivery, and also the fact that we will be there at Westminster, making sure that places like North Belfast have a strong voice. What does amaze me is the fact that the so-called Remain Alliance are going to back someone who's not even going to go to Westminster to take up his seat.
So where does this leave the political landscape? Jane McCormack is a political reporter for BBC News Northern Ireland.
Well, I think what we are seeing is that some of the battle lines really have been significantly redrawn in Northern Ireland in just a matter of days, really. What now looks likely is that you're going to see some potential game changers for some of these 18 Westminster seats, kind of explained through the prism of Brexit. Brexit, we know, has split the parties in Northern Ireland, so we are now in a situation where the Nationalist parties, Sinn Féin and the SDLP, say this election is about maximising the number of pro-Remain MPs and ousting the DUP. The DUP currently have 10 MPs in Westminster. They're very pro-Brexit, and what they are now saying is that this election is about protecting the union. And I think there are going to be two real key examples where these pacts could now have a real impact. We've got North Belfast, Nigel Dodds, of course, the DUP deputy leader, sitting MP for that area. He had 21,000 votes in 2017, a 2,000 majority over Sinn Féin's John Finucane. Now we know that the SDLP is standing aside. That means that those votes that were up for the SDLP there, they now potentially could be up for grabs for Sinn Féin. So Nigel Dodds will likely be pretty nervous about what is happening there. South Belfast again, Sinn Féin now have agreed to step aside there, and that means that the SDLP's Claire Hanna has a much stronger chance of defeating the incumbent DUP MP Emma Little-Pengelly. I think they are real battlegrounds to watch. And of course, interestingly, today Sinn Féin and the SDLP said they also won't stand in North Down. They've called on their voters to back the independent unionist MP, Lady Herman. She only had a majority of 1,000 votes in 2017, and the DUP were pretty hot on her heels there. It's not clear, we don't know yet if she will run again, but if she does, I think that constituency is going to be another one that will be really one to watch.
What about the main unionist parties? Because the Ulster Unionists seem to have done a bit of a U-turn.
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a strange week for the Ulster Unionists. Steve Aiken, he doesn't actually take over officially as the new leader until this Saturday, but already he's under a lot of pressure. In the past, in Westminster elections, we've seen the unionist parties making pacts. It's been pretty common practice. Their view is they don't want Sinn Féin to get seats because, of course, we know Sinn Féin don't take their seats in Westminster because of their long-standing abstentionism policy. Last week, though, the Ulster Unionists tried a new direction. They said that they wouldn't stand aside in any of the constituencies. We saw an immediate backlash. Unionism more widely was saying that this would hand seats to Sinn Féin effectively and damage the union. It was so badly received, actually, that at one point police were called in to investigate threats to Ulster Unionist staff. And then finally, yesterday, the party said it now would not run in North Belfast. And likewise, the DUP are saying they won't stand in another constituency, Fermanagh South Tyrone, to try and help the Ulster Unionists' chances there against Sinn Féin. Clearly, there's something for them both to gain by keeping this pact going. Steve Aiken was trying for something different, but I'm not sure how much consultation he'd done before he announced it. And if the party's vote collapses in this election, he might come under even more pressure.
It's all very well for parties to do these pacts, but it all comes down to whether or not the voters go along with their plans, doesn't it? What is the history like of electoral pacts in Northern Ireland?
I think, to be honest, parties standing aside for other and certain constituencies is nothing new. It's tried and tested. Sometimes it's a very successful strategy of quid pro quo. I think there will probably be some pro-Remain voters who think that what the SDLP and Sinn Féin are doing is sensible. Unionist voters might well prefer one unionist candidate to vote for as opposed to seen Sinn Féin get a seat because two unionist candidates have split the vote. The other thing I should say is that the other main party in Northern Ireland, the Alliance Party, their cross-community, they are saying they will not back any pact. Now, they are pro-Remain, but they say that pacts are anti-democratic, and once you start ruling yourself out of one constituency, it becomes harder to even justify your political existence in any area. Northern Ireland's parties have always said that they don't typically do pacts, but I think this argument has become an awful lot more difficult now to take seriously given what we've seen over the past 48 hours. I think now it's going to be up to the voters to see how they respond on the 12th of December. To wait and see.
Jane McCormack. A reminder of our main headline so far on The World Tonight. The Labour MP Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who's been elected as the new Commons Speaker and has said that Parliament must change for the better. For the next 10 days, the roads of the Indian capital will be less congested after the authorities in Delhi decreed that only vehicles with licence plates ending in odd numbers would be able to drive on them one day and only ones ending in even numbers on the next. It's their latest response to the dangerous levels of air pollution which have caused the city to be cloaked, or should that be choked, in a thick smog, and which has led to the declaration of a public health emergency. The reason for that is seasonal, a toxic cocktail of car and factory smoke mixed with fumes from crops that are burnt at this time of the year in two neighbouring states. Well, here's what some of Delhi's residents had to say about their city today.
You can obviously see how terrible it is, and it's actually scary. You can't see things in front of you. We're concerned about our futures and about our health.
I didn't realize how bad it will get. Do we really want our kids to grow in such an environment? No one really cares. No one wants to improve the situation.
Yeah, anyhow, it is affecting our life. I'm getting eye problem from last few days, getting cold and all.
Yes, I think it's an emergency situation because the air quality is deteriorating day by day.
Dr. Maria Nera is the director at the World Health Organization's Department of Public Health and Environment. I asked her what kind of impact air pollution can have on our health.
We know that the air pollutants, they get into our lungs, so they will cause asthma, for instance, or pneumonia or lung cancer. But then from the lungs, from our respiratory system, they can get the very small particles, they can get into the bloodstream, and then they can reach every organ. So they can cause a stroke, and definitely they affect as well our neurological development, our cognitive capacity. So it's very serious what we know about the impacts of air pollution in our health, causing 7 million premature deaths every year globally. So it's really one of the biggest public health challenges we are confronting today.
What about the measures that have been put in place in Delhi, this alternate days use of cars, the face masks that have been handed out to school children and others? How effective do you think they are?
Well, I think we need to tackle the cause of the problem. Obviously, those measures are responding to a very acute situation, and they will have a result, no doubt. But fundamentally, we need to tackle the real causes. We need to make sure that we have a better public transport system, a more sustainable one, and we reduce the incineration of waste.
The waste that is being incinerated, this happens every year, and I think it's thought to be about 50% of the cause of this acute situation. It doesn't seem to be addressed. What do you make of the way the authorities are dealing with this?
I think the farmers cannot be blamed because probably this is the only solution they have. And because, as you rightly say, this is a problem that we can anticipate, they need to look for subsidies or solutions on helping the farmers to deal with that issue. It is not the first time that this is happening. But because of that, the measures need to be more systemic and addressing the real causes of the problem.
What sort of measures are you talking about?
I'm talking about changing the source of energy and moving to a more sustainable one. We need to do something about the cars in the city and regulating the traffic. We need to stop incineration of waste. We need to stop burning, essentially. All of this is because we are burning fossil fuels or wood or coal.
And I wonder if we look at this globally, what the implications are if governments don't get to grips with this, because you say 7 million premature deaths at the moment from pollution. More and more of us are living in cities around the world, aren't we? It's only going to get worse, isn't it?
Exactly. We have, in 20 years from now, there will be 70% of the global population living in cities. And it's clear that we cannot maintain those levels of pollution for our citizens, because then our hospitals will be totally blocked, and then the expenditure on health care will be as well enormous, apart from the fact that we are killing our own citizens. Each country knows how many citizens are dying every year because of exposure of air pollution. So it depends how many deaths are you ready to accept?
And that was Dr. Maria Nera from the World Health Organization. Tomorrow, a court in Norway will hear an appeal in a landmark environmental case in which the Norwegian government is accused of violating the country's constitution by handing out licences for oil exploration in the Arctic. Paragraph 112 of Norway's constitution holds the government responsible for handing over a healthy environment to future generations. The original lawsuit was thrown out by the Oslo District Court at the beginning of last year. But since then, the campaigners have been boosted by the global impact of a certain Swedish teenager and by the support of Norway's own cross-generational climate action group, comprised of grandparents and their grandchildren. Gaute Eiterod is, as its name suggests, the youthful leader of the Nature and Youth campaign group that's been involved in the case from the start.
The judgment from Oslo District Court, we believe, has a lot of faults, because the judge wrote that these oil licenses will contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, but the emissions from the production in themselves will be quite small. The problem with that way of thinking is that all emissions on the globe are small in themselves, but all the small emissions together contribute to the warming of our planet. And also the judge stated in the judgment that yes, the oil licenses will make us produce oil and gas, but it's not our responsibility that this oil and gas will cause emissions. It's the responsibility of the countries using the oil and gas. And we believe that's a highly illogical way of looking at the climate crisis. Of course, we have a responsibility when we make a decision in Norway that we know will contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, and we shouldn't do it.
So what's different nearly 2 years on from that judgment?
Since we got our judgment in January 2018, there's been a lot of new science on the climate crisis. The IPCC have come with many new reports, how dangerous it is, what we must do to solve it. And also you've seen a huge rise among young people in Norway and all over the world. Young people are taking to the streets, they're striking school, they're all protesting the lack of action from politicians. We're doing this because we're really concerned about our future. If we can make the judges see how many young people are concerned and make them have a better understanding of the climate crisis, we will have a better judgment.
The government, from its side, would say, look, we have a target of being carbon neutral by 2030. Electricity is already 100% generated by hydropower. We have big subsidies in your country that means half of all new cars are electric. I mean, compared to this country, for example, where it's just 1%. So actually, Norway is doing rather well on a governmental level in the fight against climate change.
Yes, that's what they often say. But when you look at how much greenhouse gas emissions our export of oil and gas contributes to, it's 10 times the emissions of all other activities in Norway. And when we have such a large responsibility for contributing to the climate crisis, we believe it doesn't matter how many electric vehicles drive on the roads of Norway or how much money we pay other countries for protecting their rainforest. We're still a net contributor to the climate crisis. And as long as we're doing that, we're not in the forefront of solving the climate crisis. We're part of the problem, not the solution.
Economically, could Norway manage without the fossil fuel business, though?
Yes, we can. We would be a poorer country, but we would not be a poor country. We would be more similar to our neighboring countries, to Denmark, to Sweden, to Finland. They have all managed to have welfare states and jobs without a huge oil and gas sector. When we know that we have to solve a climate crisis, we should not be basing our entire economy on continuing to produce the product that is fueling the climate crisis, endangering people and nature all over the world.
Environmental campaigner Gaute Eiterod. Well, we did ask the Norwegian government for an interview, but no one was made available. Now, from court cases like the one in Norway to marches to the kind of sometimes sticky protests we've seen from Extinction Rebellion, there are many ways to draw attention to the issue of climate change. And here's another one, Telling Stories. A new collection of fictional short stories, each with an environmental theme, has just been published. But is fiction the right way to get the facts across when it comes to such a serious issue? The World Tonight's Paul Moss went to the book launch in a pub to find out, and to hear some of the stories being read out on stage.
Entering the cafe, Sam clicked her fingers for the waitress after they had both ordered.
It wasn't exactly your normal idea of pub entertainment. In the crowded basement of a pub in King's Cross, central London, a group had gathered to listen to some modern-day folk tales, brand new ones, some old ones reimagined, but all of them trying to make people think just a little differently about climate change and the environment in general.
On 16th September 2022, Midas delivered a quick 1-2 with first he raided the cryptocurrencies.
This writer portrayed King Midas as a modern-day eco-warrior, his magic touch turning power stations into parks. Meanwhile, Fred Pearce had a new version of The Three Little Pigs, where the pigs end up looking after the wolf. He is, after all, an endangered species. And his story has a much greener approach to the crucial topic of building materials.
It's a very different ending. In other words, the pig that made its house out of straw is the winner. It's not all about building a house out of bricks and winning. It's about being ecological and winning.
So in the original version, the winning pig with the bricks isn't actually being very ecologically minded.
Yeah, I tried very much to turn the story on its head to make the ecological solution the right one.
My name is Katie Kedward, and my story is called The Sleeping Giant of Lomar. It's a story that's set in a fictional city surrounded by a wall and sort of densely covered in this thick smog. And they sort of wander around their lives in a kind of individualized daze. So the point of my story is that part of the reason we're in this environmental and social crisis at the moment is because we're so disconnected from the people and the nature and the ecosystems that are also part of everything around us.
But can you change attitudes with stories like that?
I think so. The aim I was trying to make is to get people to read the story and see themselves in it, or see the way they live in this story. And I hope they can get a sense of isolation that perhaps they might find themselves in.
This is not an entirely new idea. Folk tales traditionally were used to convey a moral message or a warning, and fiction has previously been mobilised to address the issue of climate change. Margaret Atwood's novel The Flood, for example, imagines a future after sea levels have risen. But the new collection brings different stories together in a single anthology called Knock 3 Times. And its approach is more necessary than ever, according to the book's editor, Andrew Sims.
I think there's been an illusion for many years, and it's that the world responds to a parade of facts describing the way that things are. And I think we've all seen in the last few years that is simply not the case, and that we understand the world through patterns and through stories, and it's who is in control of telling the best stories who really gets the upper hand. So as we're facing climate breakdown and an ecological emergency, as we're trying to tell the story about how we make a better world, there's a responsibility on all of us to become better storytellers.
The weather keeps changing, the coasts rearranging.
Alan Nichols had produced a poem for the collection rather than a short story, but he did then set to music his plea for planetary protection.
Find the solution, end the pollution, hold on to the rose, not the thorn.
Nichols is something of a protest music veteran. He was in one of the original productions of the musical Hair back in the 1960s. And if narratives are now needed to mobilise environmental awareness, he believes that songs and short stories must be a part of that. If only, he says, because people now struggle to concentrate on anything longer.
The short attention span is just our enemy. People are just putting aside the idea of the environmental challenge. There are songs that can reach them. My challenge is to make them aware of the environment, make them aware that we're losing the battle.
Paul Moss reporting. Now time to travel back to the summer of 1977 and the start of a journey that would take two spacecraft, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, far, far away.
3, 2, 1. We have ignition and we have liftoff. We have liftoff of the Titan Centaur, carrying the first of two Voyager spacecraft to extend man's senses farther into the solar system than ever before. Reports coming back indicate those twin large solid motors are functioning perfectly, producing 1.2 million pounds of thrust each. 25 seconds into the launch.
Now, 42 years later, scientists have decoded the signal that the world's longest-running space mission sent back from the edge of the solar system as Voyager 2 crossed into interstellar space. Suzanne Dodd is a Voyager project manager at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She told me how the project began.
The Voyager mission was actually conceived in the late 1960s and early 1970s, has a mission to go to the outer planets, that being Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. The timing is very important because there was an opportunity. It was discovered in the late 1960s that there was an opportunity to reach all four of those planets in a 12-year time period because they were all on the same side of the sun, basically all aligned on the same side of the sun in their orbits. And that alignment only happens every 175 years. So if you weren't able to take advantage of that alignment around 1977, you'd have to wait another 175 years before it would happen again.
Right. Luckily, they were able to take advantage of it. And 42 years later, here we are. What information are we learning then?
The last planetary encounter was actually the Neptune flyby of Voyager 2 in 1989. So for the last 30 years, this mission, and both Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 have been sailing away from us and away from the sun out to the outer reaches of the heliosphere. And both spacecraft have actually now crossed what we call the heliopause, which is the edge of where the effects of our sun stop and the effects of interstellar space start.
And what have we learnt of those far distant places?
Well, I think Voyager primarily has brought a great deal of understanding to our own solar systems, to the planets in our solar systems, as well as how our planets interact with the sun and the effects of the sun on our planets. And, the reach of the sun has around us here on Earth and here on other planets in our solar system.
Just in terms of distance, how far away are they now?
Each one travels approximately 35,000 miles per second, so they travel rapidly. But so today, Voyager 1 is 22 billion kilometers from us, and Voyager 2 is about 18.3 billion kilometers from us. Voyager 1 is traveling faster, so it's going out quicker than Voyager 2.
So we're getting this idea of this sort of the shape of the big magnetic bubble around the sun. And they're going to just keep on going, are they? They're going to just bring more and more information? What happens?
Well, we are trying to make the project last as long as possible, as long as feasible. Now, realistically, each spacecraft will probably last another 5 to 8 years. And the limiting factor on the lifetime is actually the power source on the spacecraft. It uses a nuclear power source, and that loses 4 watts of power per year. And in another 5 to 8 years, we will no longer have enough power to operate the transmitter on board the spacecraft. So we won't be able to get a signal back from the spacecraft, and that's really going to end the mission. The spacecraft itself will continue traveling and will continue circling the center of our Milky Way galaxy as a silent ambassador, but we won't be able to get any information from it.
NASA's Suzanne Dodd. Our closing headline: the Labour MP Sir Lindsay Hoyle has been elected as the new Commons Speaker to replace John Bercow, beating 6 other candidates. Sir Lindsay said he wanted to remove the tarnish from Parliament's reputation. That is The World Tonight. This is James Coomarasamy. For now, from me and from everyone here on the programme, have a very good night. Hello, I'm James Coomarasamy. Thank you for downloading the World Tonight podcast from the BBC with in-depth analysis and major breaking news from a global perspective. You can also find more BBC podcasts at bbc.co.uk/podcasts.